Today, when you pull up to an American gas station, you look at the numbers on the pump with a sense of quiet, lingering frustration. You have worked hard your entire life, paid your taxes into the system, and watched your hard-earned retirement savings slowly erode under the weight of inflation, while transnational energy giants post record-breaking profits quarter after quarter. We are told by politicians, mainstream scientists, and corporate executives that the internal combustion engine, dependent entirely on fossil fuels, is the only practical way to move from point A to point B. We are told that alternative solutions are centuries away or physically impossible. But what if that is a carefully engineered lie? What if the answer to free, clean, and limitless energy was solved decades ago, right in the heart of Ohio, by an ordinary citizen working out of a simple garage? The year was 1975. America was reeling from the devastating oil crisis that reshaped the nation's economy. Long, agonizing lines twisted around every suburban gas station, tempers flared at the pumps, and the proud American dream of the open, unrestricted highway suddenly felt like it was slipping away. Industry dried up, and prices skyrocketed. In Grove City, Ohio, a tall, soft-spoken independent inventor named Stanley Meyer looked at the chaos gripping his country and decided to build a solution. Stan was not a corporate scientist with a multi-million-dollar government grant. He was a classic old-school American entrepreneur. He was the kind of man who believed that with enough grit, basic tools, and unyielding human intellect, an individual citizen could change the course of history. Working late into the night, isolated from the academic elite, surrounded by copper coils, voltage meters, and hand-drawn technical blueprints, Stan made a discovery that should have changed the world forever. He did not want to replace the gasoline engine itself. He wanted to radically change what that engine consumed. While the scientific establishment loudly claimed it was a physical impossibility, Meyer developed a device he called the water fuel cell. To understand Stanley Meyer's pure genius, you do not need a complex degree in advanced nuclear physics. Traditional corporate science said that to split water into its core components of hydrogen and oxygen, you needed a massive, unsustainable amount of electricity through a process known as standard electrolysis. It was a thermodynamic dead end, taking more energy to split the water than the resulting gases could ever produce. But Stan found a brilliant loophole in the laws of textbook physics. Instead of brute-forcing the water molecules with a high electrical current, he subjected them to a specific high-voltage resonant frequency. He literally vibrated the water with precise radio waves until the molecular bonds simply snapped under the tension. Suddenly, ordinary, inexpensive tap water transformed into a highly explosive, clean-burning gas on demand. It cost mere pennies to produce. To prove his vocal critics wrong, Stan bought a standard commercially available dune buggy powered by a conventional Volkswagen engine. He completely stripped out the gasoline tank, installed his proprietary water fuel cell in its place, and took the vehicle out onto the public streets of Ohio. The buggy ran flawlessly. There was no gasoline, no fossil fuel, and absolutely no toxic emissions. The only byproduct coming out of the exhaust pipe was pure, harmless water vapor. Stan confidently claimed that his modified vehicle could drive all the way from New York City to Los Angeles on just 22 gallons of water collected from any garden hose. He did not hide his invention in the shadows. He patented his technology under the strict, rigorous scrutiny of the United States Patent Office, receiving approval after approval as his designs passed every technical test thrown at them. The future of human civilization had arrived, and it was sitting quietly in an Ohio driveway. Word of the water-powered dune buggy spread with lightning speed across the Midwest. Local news stations arrived in Grove City, broadcasting footage of the vehicle operating perfectly without a single drop of oil. Everyday Americans saw a genuine glimpse of economic freedom, a future where their retirement and daily lives would no longer be dictated by foreign oil cartels or rapacious corporate boardrooms. Serious investors began knocking on Stan's door, offering tens of millions of dollars to buy the rights to his patents. But with that sudden, overwhelming fame, a cold shadow fell over Grove City. When you invent a device that directly threatens a trillion-dollar global monopoly, you do not just make partners, you make some of the most dangerous entrenched enemies on the face of the earth. As Stanley Meyer's reputation grew, the initial excitement surrounding his invention was quickly met by an ominous wall of resistance. The global energy market is not just a business, it is the foundational bedrock of geopolitical power. A technology that allows a citizen to run a vehicle on water from a backyard hose effectively decentralizes that power, shifting it from elite boardrooms back to the working class. For the corporate entities that controlled the oil fields, the pipelines, and the political infrastructure of the West, Stan's dune buggy was not an ecological miracle. It was an existential threat to their survival. The pressure began quietly, behind closed doors. Mysterious men representing shadowy international consortia and unspecified foreign interests began arriving in Ohio. They did not come to argue the physics of the water fuel cell. They came with suitcases full of cash. Stan was offered staggering sums of money, eventually reaching a reported $100 million, simply to sell his patents, hand over his prototypes, and walk away from his research. To an ordinary mechanic from Ohio, this was generational wealth, an invitation to a life of absolute luxury. But Stan possessed a stubborn, old-school moral compass. He understood precisely what would happen if a massive oil conglomerate bought his technology. The patents would be classified, locked away in a subterranean corporate vault, and never allowed to see the light of day. The world would continue to burn oil, and ordinary families would continue to pay the price. Stan refused the offers. He publicly declared that his invention belonged to the American people and to humanity as a whole. It was a noble stance, but in the ruthless world of high-stakes energy politics, refusing $100 million is a dangerous declaration of war. When the money failed to silence him, the system shifted its tactics from bribery to systemic destruction. If you cannot buy an inventor, you ruin his reputation, drain his finances, and tie him up in the legal system until he suffocates under the weight of court fees. In the late 1980s, a coordinated, highly public smear campaign was launched against Stanley Meyer. Mainstream scientific journals, heavily funded by corporate grants, suddenly published articles labeling his work as a blatant hoax, a physical impossibility that violated the foundational laws of thermodynamics. They called him a charlatan, a backyard fraud, preying on the desperation of an energy-starved public. Soon after, the legal system was weaponized against him. Two independent investors who had previously backed his research suddenly turned on him, filing major lawsuits in Ohio courts. They claimed that Meyer had misled them, that his demonstrations were fraudulent, and that his water fuel cell was nothing more than an ordinary, inefficient electrolysis machine disguised with flashy electronics. The subsequent legal battle was brutal and deeply biased. The court appointed 3 independent expert witnesses to examine Stan's dune buggy and the water fuel cell. However, under mysterious circumstances, these experts never actually performed a comprehensive, hands-on test of the running vehicle under controlled conditions. Instead, they relied on a purely theoretical review of his blueprints, concluding that there was no scientific basis for his claims of resonant frequency splitting. In 1996, an Ohio court found Stanley Meyer guilty of gross and egregious fraud. The judge ordered him to pay back the investors every single cent of their funding. The mainstream media corporate networks carried the verdict nationwide, effectively destroying his credibility in the eyes of the general public. To the average viewer watching the evening news, the case was closed. Stanley Meyer was just another con man who had tried to cheat the system. But for those who knew Stan personally, the verdict made no sense. He wasn't living a lavish lifestyle. He was still working in the same dusty garage, pouring his own limited funds into perfecting the technology. He wasn't running away with the money. He was fighting to keep his patents alive. Despite the crushing legal defeat and the public humiliation, Stan refused to stop. He continued to refine his designs, quietly attracting the attention of a very different, much more powerful group of observers, the military-industrial complex. As the 1990s drew to a close, Stan began receiving visits from high-ranking military officials and government contractors. The Pentagon had realized that a vehicle capable of running on any local water source would revolutionize battlefield logistics, eliminating the vulnerable multi-billion-dollar fuel supply lines that clogged military operations. For a brief moment, it appeared that Stan might find protection under the umbrella of national security. He entered into quiet negotiations with NATO and military scientists, hoping that if the civilian world was blocked from using his technology, the defense of his country might at least keep it from being destroyed. But entering the world of classified government contracts is like walking into a labyrinth from which no one ever truly returns. By the spring of 1998, Stanley Meyer believed he was finally on the verge of a breakthrough that would bypass the corporate blockade. He had survived the lawsuits, withstood the character assassination, and was actively seeking alternative ways to bring his technology to the global market. On March 20th, 1998, Stan, along with his twin brother Barrett, scheduled a vital lunch meeting at a local Cracker Barrel restaurant in Grove City, Ohio. They were there to meet with two foreign investors who had expressed deep interest in funding his operations outside of the restrictive borders of the United States. The atmosphere at the table was professional, filled with talk of the future and the massive potential of the water fuel cell. Shortly after the food and drinks were served, Stan took a sip of his cranberry juice. Almost immediately, his demeanor changed. He suddenly gripped his throat, his face contorting in sheer agony. He bolted from the table, rushing out into the restaurant's parking lot, desperately gasping for air. Barrett rushed out after his twin brother, finding him collapsed on the pavement, convulsing. Barrett bent down, cradling Stan's head in his arms, asking frantically what was happening. With his absolute last breath, Stanley Meyer looked directly into his brother's eyes and uttered 5 chilling words that would echo through the decades. "They poisoned me." Moments later, his body went limp. Stanley Meyer was pronounced dead at the age of 57. The sudden violent death of a healthy, world-renowned alternative energy inventor on the cusp of a major financial deal should have triggered a massive, high-profile federal investigation. Instead, the local authorities handled the case with a jarring lack of urgency. The official coroner's report was released relatively quickly, concluding that Stanley Meyer had died from a sudden brain aneurysm brought on by high blood pressure. According to the state of Ohio, it was a tragic, untimely death from natural causes. Case closed. But those who knew the ruthless nature of the energy industry refused to accept the official narrative. Barrett Meyer publicly maintained that his brother was murdered, pointing out that Stan's final words were not a hallucination, but a direct accusation. Furthermore, deep suspicions arose regarding the two foreign investors who had sat at the table with Stan that afternoon. Following the incident in the parking lot, both individuals quietly vanished from the scene, never providing formal statements to investigators, and their true identities were never conclusively verified by journalists. The suspicious timing of Stan's death mirrors a pattern well known to students of hidden American history. In the high-stakes world of alternative energy, a sudden heart attack, an unexpected stroke, or convenient accident often seems to occur just as an independent inventor refuses to be bought out by corporate interests. Following Stan's death, the final devastating blow to his legacy was delivered. Under the provisions of the Invention Secrecy Act, and amid the chaotic legal wrapping of his estate, Stan's workshop was completely cleared out. The working prototypes of the water fuel cell, his highly advanced proprietary equipment, and the extensive vaults containing his original unedited technical data were seized and locked away under the vague umbrella of national security and property disputes. The famous water-powered dune buggy, which had driven proudly through the streets of Ohio, was quietly moved to a secure, undisclosed location, stripped of its core components, and hidden from public view forever. Today, Stanley Meyer's story stands as a sobering testament to the immense cost of defying the global energy monopoly. He was a man who dared to envision an America where energy was free, where pollution was a thing of the past, and where ordinary citizens were no longer financial captives to the oil pump. He paid for that vision with his career, his reputation, and ultimately, his life. As you drive away from the gas pump today, watching your hard-earned money tick away into corporate bank accounts, remember the independent inventor from Grove City, Ohio. The technology to liberate humanity did not fail. The system simply ensured it would never be allowed to succeed. The blueprints remain buried, the prototypes remain hidden, and the trillion-dollar wheel continues to turn, fueled by the silence of those who dared to change the world. Though Stanley Meyer's voice was silenced in that Ohio parking lot, the ripples of his invention refused to flatline. The system managed to seize his physical prototypes and lock away his primary files, but they could not erase the hundreds of public patents he had already registered with the United States government. In the years following his death, a quiet, decentralized movement began to form in the shadows of the early Internet. Independent engineers, retired mechanics, and hobbyists across America began digging into the public archives, downloading Meyer's original schematics, and attempting to do what the corporate world claimed was impossible: reverse engineer the water fuel cell. This global grassroots effort revealed an even deeper layer of systemic control. Many builders who managed to successfully replicate parts of Meyer's resonance technology reported sudden, unexplainable roadblocks. Web servers hosting their open-source data were abruptly taken down. Their home workshops were visited by local zoning officials wielding obscure regulations. And in several cases, inventors received formal cease and desist letters citing the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. The message from the top was loud and clear. Even if you build this technology in your own home, with your own money, you are not allowed to share it with the world. The tragic reality of Stanley Meyer's legacy is that his story is not an isolated incident. It is merely one chapter in a hidden, century-long economic war against human progress. From Nikola Tesla's confiscated wardrobe of papers in 1943 to the crushed hulls of the revolutionary E51 electric cars in the 1990s, the blueprint of suppression remains identical. The global financial system relies entirely on scarcity. If energy becomes free, if a citizen can simply harvest fuel from a passing rainstorm or a garden hose, the artificial value of the US dollar shifts, the power of central banks diminishes, and the tight grip of corporate governance slips. As the generation that watched America rise to its technological peak in the mid-20th century, you have lived through an era of profound transformation. You remember a time when American innovation was driven by the raw ingenuity of the individual, not the predatory mandates of trillion-dollar monopolies. Stanley Meyer was perhaps the last great titan of that fading era, a man who looked at a national crisis and tried to innovate his country out of bondage, using nothing more than the tools in his garage and the brilliance of his mind. The next time you pull up to a gas pump, and you watch those digital numbers rapidly spinning, calculating how much of your hard-earned retirement income is being transferred to a corporate conglomerate, realize that you are not just paying for oil. You are paying for the enforcement of an artificial reality. The technology to liberate your wallet and free the open road was built, tested, and proven right here on American soil. It did not fail because of physics. It failed because the forces of greed could not afford to let it live. Stanley Meyer gave everything to break the wheel, and his story stands as a permanent reminder that true freedom is never given. It is fiercely and sometimes dangerously hidden away.